Well, hello, everybody. I hope your week is a good one this week. It sure feels good for us to be back gathering as people in smaller groups, having activities together. This past Sunday, we had our first church service since the first week in December. So I think it's kind of bolstered everybody's spirit. So I hope you've had a good week as well. Now, here we are. We're the first Sunday of Lent. And it's a focus for many churches to where they kind of hone in and really pay attention over the next 40 days leading up to Easter on things like prayer and repentance and fasting. So today I want to take just one of those elements and kind of focus in on that, and that's the element of prayer. Well, Jesus, he prayed one of the longest prayers in the Bible. If we read John 17, we see that in its entirety, it's a prayer of Jesus. But the person who seemed to record the most prayers was actually David. David wrote about 75 of the Psalms. And when we read his Psalms, what we see is that very often his Psalms are simply written prayers to God. Let me give you a couple examples of those. In Psalm 22:1, David writes this. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning?" And it sure sounds like that's an intense prayer of David's, doesn't it? My God, why have you forsaken me? Now, another example that David gives us is in Psalm 51:1, when he writes this. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love. According to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. And David was a lot like me. He's a lot like you, perhaps, in that we all need God's mercy. I want to give you another example. It's Psalm 55:1. David says this. Give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not yourself from my plea for mercy. Well, here's the thing. You and I, we hope that God is listening to our prayers. He hears our prayers, and he does something about them. And David is hoping that same thing. But I believe that David was confident that God would answer his prayers. And we're going to see that a little later on when we take an in-depth look at another one of David's Psalms. Lastly, in Psalm 141:1, David writes this. He says, O Lord, I call upon you. Hasten to me. Give ear to my voice when I call to you. And you know, lots of times when we are praying, it's as though time is of the essence for us. We need an answer. We need an answer now. Actually, we needed an answer yesterday. And David was like that at times as well. He really needed an answer from God. So there are just 4 examples of the Psalms that David wrote in which he simply was writing a prayer to God. But today I wanted to kind of settle in on one of David's Psalms. It's Psalm 143. And I want to take a look with you at the prayer that David prays and kind of explore the depths of it with you today. So let's begin. Psalm 143, verse 1. If you have a Bible, feel free to grab that, and I'll wait just a minute here for you. But Psalm 143, we're going to look at the first 8 verses in that chapter to see what David prays and what it might have to say to me and you today. So here we go. Psalm 143, verse 1, David writes this. Hear my prayer, O Lord. Give ear to my pleas for mercy. In your faithfulness, answer me in your righteousness. Hear my prayer for mercy, God. I have to tell you something. I pray that on a regular basis. I need mercy because I'm an imperfect person, and maybe you need mercy for that same reason. There are times when I need mercy because I feel overwhelmed by life. And I feel overwhelmed by the intensity of life sometimes. And then there are other times when I pray for God's mercies because I've made a mistake. And you know what? I do make mistakes. I hope I don't disappoint you too much by telling you that as a chaplain, I make mistakes. So I do find myself asking God for mercy during those times. David continues writing in the next verse, Psalm 143, verse 2. This is what he says: "Enter not into judgment with your servant, for no one living is righteous before you." Well, I wonder if here David is saying something like, God, I don't need your judgment. I feel bad enough as it is. Nobody does the right thing all the time, especially me. That could have been my prayer. David prayed it, but surely I could have prayed that same thing because I'm an imperfect person and I don't need judgment. Most of us don't need judgment. Sometimes I think we feel like God will judge us, but we need his mercy. And that's what David's praying for here. Now we continue on in the next verse, Psalm 143, verse 3. This is what David writes. He says, "For the enemy has pursued my soul. He has crushed my life to the ground. He has made me sit in darkness like those long dead." Well, this seems to be, I'm not positive, but this seems to be happening at a time when David was fleeing from his son Absalom. And Absalom had usurped the kingdom from David. He had kind of pulled a coup, if you will, and taken over the kingdom from David. And David flees. He's running for his life. And perhaps once again, he finds himself in a cave as he was earlier in life when he was running from King Saul. He describes himself in this verse as sitting in the darkness. And I would imagine he's feeling somewhat defeated at this point. He continues writing in the next verse, Psalm 143, verse 4, and this is what David says. He writes, "Therefore my spirit faints within me. My heart within me is appalled." I tell you, I can feel the weight of what David is writing there when he says, "My spirit faints within me." I felt that way, almost kind of like the life has been sucked out of me. Well, I wonder in this if David is somewhat saying, God, I never thought I would be here at this point of my life. Seems like a time when he was running from Absalom, his son, but he had been doing that same type of thing earlier in life with running from King Saul. So maybe David's seeing this as a deja vu for him, if you will. And I was wondering, have you ever thought or prayed that in your life? God, I never thought I would end up at this point in my life. Well, I've thought that. Maybe you've thought that. I look at life and I think to myself, this isn't how I envisioned a life going for me. Sometimes those thoughts come when I'm facing a crisis, and maybe that's happened in your life also. It could have been a health crisis, a financial crisis, a family crisis. And David is in some sort of crisis right now, and it's so intense that he feels like he's about to die. He says, my spirit faints within me. Now he continues writing in the next verse, Psalm 143, verse 5, and this is what David says. I remember the days of old. I meditate on all that you have done. I ponder the works of your hands. Now I believe this is the essential part of David's prayer in this chapter. I believe this is the part that most of us can identify with. I believe this is where we can learn from David about praying. He says first in this verse, I remember the days of old. David reflects on life, and many of us do, especially as we age. I do it. I've heard others talking about doing it. maybe you do it also. We remember what life was once like for us. We remember some of the roads that we traveled down and who traveled that road with us. We remember the good times, and also we remember some of those not so good times as well. But look at David's approach to what he's reflecting on in this verse. Because next he says this, I meditate on all that you have done. And I'd like us to notice here that David reflects on all that God had done in his life. Not all that David had done with his life, not all of his personal achievements, but all that God had done for David. And that helps to have perspective and balance in life. God had gotten David through things in the past. He'll get David through things in the future. Same is true for me and you. God has gotten me through tough times in the past. He'll get me through tough times in the future. I can count on it. David was counting on it. I hope that you count on God doing that as well. Let me ask you a question. When you pray, do you reflect on the goodness of God throughout your life? Is that part of what happens when you pray? Do you reflect upon the good things that God has done for you? You know, I find myself doing that more frequently, and I think it has something to do with aging. I stop, I pray, I think about where God has brought me from, all God has brought me through, how he's been merciful to me, how he's been good to me, how he's been compassionate toward me, how he's helped me. So David reflects on life. I reflect on life. I think most of us do at some point. Then David says this in that same verse. He says, I ponder the works of your hands. David's prayer wasn't one of remembering all that he had accomplished with his life. He remembers all the things that God had done across the seasons of his life. I think this is what gives David confidence that God has the ability to answer his prayers, and he will answer his prayers. So David continues in the next verse, 143, verse 6. David writes, I stretch out my hands to you. My soul thirsts for you like a parched land, Selah. Well, when I read that, my thoughts go to this. Because I know what you've done, because I've seen it with my eyes, because I've lived it and experienced it, because I've observed you at work, God, time and time again, now I stretch out my hands in prayer, coming to you once more, God. David's coming to God with these intense prayers, and he's saying, I'm thirsty for you, God. Well, we continue on. Psalm 143, verse 7. This is what David writes next. Answer me quickly, O Lord. My spirit fails. Hide not your face from me, lest I go down to the pit like those. I need your help again, God. I'm on the verge of failing. You have to do something soon, God. Have you ever felt that way? I felt that way. I feel that way on a regular basis. It seems like, God, you've got to come through here. There doesn't seem to be any other answer but you, God. Well, I want to look at this last verse in Psalm 143, verse 8, the last verse we'll be looking at. This is what David writes. He says, let me hear in the morning of your steadfast love, for in you I trust. Make me know the way I should go, for to you I lift up my soul. This is how David has experienced God in his life, believing tomorrow would have the answer that he needed. Tomorrow would be a better day than today. Make me know your way, Make me know the way I should go, God. Order my steps for tomorrow. And I believe that David was saying, I want what you want for my life, God. And for me, I don't know that we could pray a greater prayer during this season of Lent than that. God, I want what you want for my life. You know, that was part of Jesus' longest prayer in John 17. He wanted his Father's will in his life, regardless of what it would mean for his own life. I hope you do also. I hope you want everything that God has planned for your life. Well, I hope you have a good week and a good weekend, and I'll talk to you next week. God bless all of you. See you soon.